I typically don't like to use paper, but I am going to use paper today because there's a few things I want to say, and I really do not want to miss a point. Thank you. That's what I want to say. Thank you. Thank you to our membership for entrusting the organization with your confidence. Thank you to all of our donor classes, whether you're a foundation, a corporation, a small business, an estate, or any other entity which equally entrusts us with your confidence. Thank you to all the ATC employees who are tirelessly working in pursuit of our staggering mission and vision. Thank you to our partners, be they trail clubs, federal and state government parks and agencies, and the numerous communities. Your support to our cause is critical to our success. Thank you to our volunteers, whether you are moving rocks, cutting trees, building or rebuilding privies, whether you are performing staff-like functions in support of our ATC employees, whether you are a member of the board, the President's Leadership Council Circle, the Stewardship Council. Your commitment to our goal exemplifies what is so important to our success, and that's volunteerism. That is the soul of our community. We are humbled and honored that your passion is us. And finally, thank you to all of the spouses, partners, brothers, sisters, daughters, sons, grandchildren, grandparents, and friends of those who volunteer. Their time with us is not time with you. We appreciate your tolerance, and we want to ensure all of you, their passion is well placed. So thank you to all of you. So let's get started with the agenda. We're going to have your time for the next hour and a half. We're going to first hear from Jim Latore. He's our treasurer. We will then hear from Sandy Mara. She's our new president and chief executive officer. Please, as you listen to them, if you come up with questions, send your questions in as each speaker is presenting. We have somebody here who will sort them accordingly and address them after all the speakers are done. You should see an email at the bottom of the screen. And if you don't, it's election@appalachiantrail.org. Once the speakers are done, I'll introduce you to the remainder of our officers, and we'll take your questions. Finally, I will review with you the results of the election, and that will be the day. So we have the next hour and a half. We'll get started. And again, thank you for everyone for joining us. Jim?
Thank you, Colin, and good morning to everyone. I'm going to use some slides here because the numbers always can get a little thick, but I think you're going to catch on real quickly that the ATC is doing a good job in shepherding its resources, and we have all of you to thank for that. But 4 areas I'd like to share. There we go. A little bit about myself, take you through where we are in terms of our key financial results from 2018, 2017, bring you up to speed as to what's happened in the last 7 months or so with the ATC, and then some final thoughts. But before I do that, a year ago this time, Mary Higley was standing up here, and for a couple of years prior to that as our treasurer and a long board member and trail hiker. On behalf of the board, I'd like to extend a sincere thank you to Mary for everything that she has done for the ATC and for her leadership on the board. Mary stepped off the board very recently and has assumed a position to help us through some financial work at the ATC proper. So again, Mary, if you're out there, thank you very much for your dedication and your willingness to continue to serve the ATC. A little bit about myself. So June of this year, after a 39-year career in public accounting as a CPA, I finally put away the green eye shades, turned off the computer, and decided to take my retirement. As an individual, avid hiker, avid mountaineer, although I think my days going vertical are sort of done, and I'm going to stick with the horizontal. And I love to also be on a road bike or on a mountain bike whenever I possibly can. I was elected to the board a year ago. With Mary's retirement from the board, I stepped into the treasurer's role. And as the treasurer also sits on the executive committee and is chair of the finance committee. I'm also a member of the PATC and finally did my first event with them, which was a group called the Vigorous Hikers. And yes, they are vigorous hikers. So I was happy to say I was one of the younger, but I couldn't keep up. Lastly, if all goes well, I'm planning a through hike for 2020. I am accepting all donations of leftover freeze-dried food, and anything that you might have in terms of advice, ping me, I'll take it. So let's get into the financial information. So when you think of the balance sheet, so we're going to talk a little bit about the structure of the financial statements. So your balance sheet is a snapshot in time as to where the organization is with respect to its assets and then its obligations. And we always like to look at total assets and then another category called net assets, sort of what's left over if you were to fulfill all your obligations. And you'll see when you look at 2018 versus 2017, we had a very nice increase in the total assets, the good stuff that's available to us to do the work and the mission of the ATC. And that came about primarily for two main reasons. One, the generous contributions of our members and all those who have participated in providing us the funds to do the things we need to do. The second area is the Volgino Foundation. Just deep thank you to the Volgino Foundation for what they have meant in terms of allowing us to touch the trail and do all the good things we need to do. We also have a second measure, and that's sort of what's left over, and that's called the net assets of the organization. And you'll see we actually had a little drop there of about 3%. Nothing to panic about, because when you actually study that drop, you're going to see it in a second, all of the drop was primarily related to the fact that at that point in time, our investment portfolio was in the negative versus in the positive in terms of the growth that it experienced year over year. Happy to report that that's reversed itself in 2019. Remember, it's interest rates, it's market conditions as of a point in time. So that's our basic balance sheet for an organization of this nature. Pretty good. In terms of our revenue, what I learned when I came into the ATC and began to study our financials, this is really a complicated organization. Size does not really tell us how complicated it is. We have what I'll call three main sources of revenue that are actively pursued and one passively pursued. So those three active areas, as you can see, deal with our memberships, dues and contributions. It also then addresses where we work with our collaborative management agreement, so all the collaborators in there, the National Park Services and others who provide funding. And then the third area is our publications and merchandising. So three discrete areas that have to be tracked, monitored, budgeted, and kept healthy. Then there's the third area, the fourth area rather, the passive area. And that's obviously our portfolio. We have a nice portfolio, it sits with an investment advisor, and that can fluctuate depending on the market conditions. Good news, in each of the three active managed areas, we actually had some nice increases to allow us to do the things we need to do in terms of the trail last year. The flip side, however, you can see the results where we had over a $2 million swing on our P&L, which again, point in time because of those interest rates and with the market conditions in that portfolio. So that's where we were in terms of generation of revenue. The next area is expenses. And by the way, if you are interested, sitting on the ATC's website, you can actually find our audited financial statements. There's a history of them there. They go back 10 years or so. All this information here is actually contained in that document, so you can reconcile back. But when you look at our history of expenses, one thing I want to call your attention to, for not-for-profits, 501c3s, we often look at the percentage of monies spent in the programs versus the percentage of monies spent at the administrative or management level. And as you can see here, year over year, we're pretty consistent. If anything, a slight uptick, where 78% of the monies that we have, we put against the programs of the ATC. And quite honestly, if you parse out some of that development administrative cost, some of that's programmatic as well. A 78% threshold is pretty good in terms of returning back to the mission the monies that come in. So we watch that, or at least we do watch to make sure that the monies we take in are not being spent on areas that are not perceived as valuable to the trail and to the mission of the ATC. Let me talk a little bit then to wrap up 2018 about the results of our audit. So every year we receive an independent audit from a local accounting firm. And this year, as they have in the past, they've issued an unqualified opinion on our financial statements. That is the highest level of opinion that a certified public accountant can issue for an organization. So when you look at the financial statements, basically the opinion says, yes, you can trust in those numbers as materially telling the story of the ATC and its policies, financial policies, for both 2017 and 2018. Our auditors also are required to give us a second report on our internal control structure. Think of that as a report card. During the course of the year, how well did we do with respect to our own internal policies, as well as adhering to generally accepted accounting principles and other matters of internal control? And there they came back and they gave us some qualifications, okay? And they basically said, ATC, we have found these particular areas where we wish for you to relook at what you're doing and to improve. Otherwise, you may be able to introduce into your financial statement some errors that will need to be corrected and caught and then corrected. So in response, management has already put in place a corrective action plan. In addition, the board independently set up a task force to study certain of these areas and collaborate with management to implement the corrective action plan. And we're in full swing doing that as we speak. Let me switch gears in the few seconds I have left, and let's talk about where we are for 2019. There we go. I shared with you a few seconds ago the major budgetary categories. This year, this time versus last year, we are actually running in the red, or I should say behind budget, with respect to where we are on generation of revenue at the top line. So any help you can give, we would love to see some contributions coming in, making sure you're getting your membership there, and buy some great books. I got my ATC mug all ready to go. Every little bit helps. So we are, management under Sandy, they're already looking and saying, okay, what do we need to do to make sure that we are reaching out to the proper constituencies to continue to help fund us at that top line in these particular areas. With respect to expenses, we are tracking. We are tracking right to where we want to be on budget, maybe a little bit difference in categories, but we're studying and making sure for the remainder of this year that management can, in effect, continue to adhere to the budgetary requirements and making sure we're achieving the mission. Now, what the board has done is from reserves, we have released enough cash to allow the ATC to be able to do that. And that's the function of the board, is to monitor where we are with respect to our reserves, our cash reserves, and to make sure they're being used for those things that are appropriately either budgeted or asked for and then subsequently approved at the board level. Good news, we still have cash in the bank. There's no panic here, but we watch it very closely, and we're making sure that as we look out into 2020, as we begin the budgeting cycle, that we are really studying our nickels and dimes to make sure that we can achieve our mission, drive that percentage of expenses even higher than 78%. But as it always goes, you need to bring in money to be able to spend money. Last comment. I want to echo what Colin opened up saying. You are the heart and soul of the Appalachian Trail, the volunteers. Again, I'm a relatively newbie here, about a year. I was astounded when I saw these statistics. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. You don't see this, and I've been affiliated with a number of other boards, not-for-profit specifically. You don't see this sort of support at the level. And these are the hours that you all have given to the ATC. There's much more on top of this that you've given to your individual trail clubs and to the other organizations in which you participate. So from the bottom of our hearts, thank you. You are the heartbeat of what goes on here. So keep it up. 2020, if you see me on the trail, don't ask me any financial information, but I will share some coffee with you. Thank you, and I'll be back for questions later. Sandy?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, people in the room. Thank you. Hold on, I'm not using paper, I'm using a computer. So my name is Sandy Mara. I've certainly stood here before for quite a few years in different roles. I am amazed and humbled and so honored to have the opportunity to now stand in front of all of you as the new president and CEO of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. I think a lot of you probably know me, but just to give you some background for those folks who might not, I've been volunteering for the Appalachian Trail for pretty much my entire life. I started as a member of the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club when I was 25 years old. I don't want to say how long that was, but needless to say, it's been a long time. I started in the club. I learned how to build a shelter. Actually, was what the first project was working on Rod Hollow Shelter. I learned how to weed a trail and how to clip back branches. I learned how to paint a privy. Lots of all the skills that those of us in the clubs and in the trenches know what to do. I personally maintain with my husband 3 miles of the Appalachian Trail through the roller coaster, which my husband, Chris Trail Boss Brunton, was responsible for building. And I am the person that makes sure the blazes are fresh and we know where we're going as we walk down that and all sections of the trail. The Appalachian Trail and the Conservancy and the club has been part of the fabric of my life, and I am just thrilled to be able to continue to support all the work that it does. You know, as I started thinking about what to talk about today, I feel it's really critical that we start and remembering our roots even as we move forward, kind of like the tree. The roots and holding on underneath is so important, and yet it does need to go up to capture the sun and the rain. And I think of 3 key words that has always been the ATC and the AT: trail, landscape, and volunteers. That's who we are. And I also think about the role, which I don't think we talk enough about, of the ATC, of the first conference and then Conservancy, in ensuring trail, landscape, and volunteers. So the ATC, the Appalachian Trail Conference, led in planning for and completion of the AT footpath. Without the ATC, the AT would not exist. ATC played a key role in advocating for the AT, for the Appalachian Trail, to become a national scenic trail. The National Scenic Trails Act, which celebrated its 50th anniversary last year, the entire National Scenic and Historic Trail system would not exist without the influence and power that the Appalachian Trail Conference at that time brought to Capitol Hill to make that act a reality. ATC has led the planning and advocacy for acquisition of the AT Protective Greenway, the corridor, without which development would have absolutely reached the edge of the treadway. So that wilderness aspect of the trail that we experience today would not exist without the Appalachian Trail Conference and the Conservancy. We provide training to volunteers and dedicated trail crews that annually complete hundreds of miles of radically improved and sustainable AT treadway. The open footpath, the ability to walk from Georgia to Maine, would not exist without ATC and primarily the AT clubs. ATC initiates and manages a variety of land management programs, such as invasive species eradication, meadow and grassy bald maintenance throughout the AT Greenway. Continually improving the trail and that greenway has really ensured that we're not walking through a total enclosed green tunnel from Georgia to Maine. And again, without ATC, that wouldn't be happening. We are in the process of developing and dedicating time and dollars to ensuring best practices on how to manage what is a growing and expanding visitor use and the subsequent impacts that come from that use. I truly believe that without ATC and the work that we are doing now and will be doing in the future, the AT experience may disappear. And through our Wild East initiative, ATC and the Appalachian Trail Landscape Partnership is working to expand protection of the natural areas surrounding the entire trail, bringing into reality Mackay's initial vision of an interconnected realm meant to preserve our wild spaces for the benefit of all living beings. But much like on the trail, and I've certainly had this experience, just when you think you've reached the summit, it ends up being a false summit, and you find that there's still a long climb to go. And the recent year or two has certainly brought some challenges of both old and new. There are ongoing battles to maintain the integrity of the AT viewshed and its environments. Poorly planned energy infrastructure projects such as Mountain Valley Pipeline threaten to carve a long-lasting scars into the AT landscape rather than work to find more sustainable locations. Despite some political victories, invaluable conservation programs like the Land and Water Conservation Fund continue to struggle to find funding. A series of, honestly, in my opinion, misguided policy decisions threaten the effectiveness of bedrock legislation like the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act. And tragically, despite the trail still being one of the safest havens for hikers around the world, we were reminded this year that even the AT is not immune to the dangers of our society. But through these challenges and heartbreaks, shining lights always come through. And the light is the community of hikers, conservationists, volunteers, ATC members, doers, and dreamers that continue to be a voice for the Appalachian Trail. Whether by dedicating their time to restoring and preserving the trail as a volunteer, becoming advocates on Capitol Hill, donating much-needed funds to help maintain the footpath and the surrounding landscapes, these guardians are what help to ensure that the Appalachian Trail remains a sanctuary for those who seek fellowship with wilderness. As we look to 2020 and beyond, we seek to build this coalition of trail supporters and defenders so that whatever the challenge, as in the past, the Appalachian Trail will continue to be a refuge for millions of individuals seeking a closer relationship with the natural world. We want to build connections and provide opportunities for the next generation of trail builders and conservationists. I want the trail to be a welcoming place for individuals from all backgrounds and experiences to provide the insight necessary to make the trail a welcoming, accessible destination for all. We have to continue to be a voice for the trail in Washington, D.C., and in local and state governments, fighting for decisions that will maintain the integrity of the trail, the surrounding lands, and strengthen its protections. We need to continue to build relationships needed to ensure that the trail is supported financially, funding projects necessary for wild east preservation, as well as all the fundamental things that we provide to make that trail a reality and a safe and welcoming place to everyone. We need to continue to build and strengthen relationships to manage, inspire, and support the community of volunteers, organizations, agencies, and individuals who have committed their precious resources to furthering AT protection. And we will continue to strengthen the foundations of the ATC itself, ensuring we fulfill our mission in preserving the Appalachian Trail forever and for all. The Appalachian Trail is why we're here. The Conservancy is uniquely experienced, uniquely positioned, and uniquely capable of managing and protecting that trail. We all need your support and help as we continue along the path that is truly the audacious project called the Appalachian Trail. Thank you. Are you just coming to join me?
Yeah. Thank you, Sandy.
You're welcome.
The board is extremely lucky to have Sandy here with us.
Oh, thank you.
And our confidence in her ability to bring us to the next level is high.
Thank
very,
you.
very high. So we appreciate you. If you can scan over to the table, I want to introduce the rest of the officers. One who's not here, Rob Hutchison, is actually out on the trail. The last time I chatted with him, I think he's in the 100-mile wilderness area. He wanted to join us in this call, and I suggested strongly he'd not, so hopefully he didn't. If you're
But if
out
he
there,
did, we'll
Rob,
say hi.
please hang up. So you met Jim, and Jim, I know everything's relative, but the Appalachian Trail is not horizontal.
Yeah, I know, I wondered
It
what he
was
was
on- I-
thinking
It
when he
goes
said
up and
that.
down, and up and down. I know.
If you hike southbound, it is kind of downhill though, right?
Beth Britton is the chair of the Stewardship Council. The board recently made a decision to make that position an executive officer of the board. We consider that position very, very important. It is the board and the executive officer's linkage to the trail community, and we consider her, obviously the work that Beth has done, but irrespective of whether it's Beth or anyone else, that position should be at the table and represent that whole area. There's not a single person on the board who doesn't understand and doesn't appreciate the volunteerism and the importance of that to us. And we are very appreciative of that, and we wanted that at the table. The last person on the table is Ed Guyot, and he's our treasurer. He's our secretary. And this is his second year as his secretary?
Yes.
Second, yeah. So that's our executive officer team. They will be here to help us with questions and answers. There's other board members out in the audience who are being very, very quiet. And to the extent that we can engage them as well, we'll do so. Okay? So, I guess the next thing we're gonna do is talk about questions and answers. Again, you should see at the bottom of your screen, the election at appalachiantrail.org. You can send your questions in, and we'll do the best we can to answer them. So why don't we get started with Q's and A's?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sandy, Colin. We had a few questions come in, and this first one, reflecting on the current strategic plan that ATC is in right now, where do you feel that ATC has made the most progress, and where do you feel ATC needs to focus more attention to moving forward?
You wanna start?
Do you want me to start?
Sure.
So I think under the current plan, I think we've done a good job in really setting a foundation. We're in our 5th year of that plan. When it was developed, it was one of the first times the organization had done such a formal strategic planning process. One of the things, and this was as a board member during that period, that I've always been impressed with is how well I feel that we often connected a lot of what went into AT Journeys as it tied back to some of the key areas within that strategic plan. Quite frankly, Wild East is probably the biggest outcropping of what we're doing, because that plan very specifically talked about the need for us to take what had originally been an organization that built the treadway and then created the corridor, that it was now time, and we again uniquely positioned to take the lead on recognizing the value and importance of creating that greater landscape if we were to long-term ensure not just the hiker experience, but making sure that this contiguous piece of protected land from Georgia to Maine remains protected, remains a safe habitat for our animals, and birds can continue along their routes along the spine, that the waters that come along that ridge top that flows down into the communities remain protected and safe. So I think that's been our biggest accomplishment in taking to heart what was in that original plan 5 years ago and seeing how far we've come in that time to where we are now with our Wild East initiative.
Yeah, and I think that as we look forward, a couple of things. One is that we want to make sure that we're more responsive. So the last plan was 5 years, and we've decided to go into a 3-year planning cycle. And in fact, every year we're going to revisit that plan. So we're hoping that will allow us to be much more flexible and responsive to the changing needs of the organization, as well as the changing demands on the trail. And the second area is really getting very, very deliberate about the programs that we want to initiate and the funding for those programs. And I think we're going to get more disciplined around what we're trying to establish for programs, be able to communicate them more effectively across the whole board, and There will be some programs, certain stakeholders will resonate with over others, and to the extent that we can get ourselves very deliberate around funding against program, I think we'll be more successful as well.
And a follow-up to that, how do you envision the next strategic plan will address the critical need to involve more youth and a more diverse population in not only using the AT, but also in helping protecting and managing the trail?
We are absolutely committed to not only youth, but diversity as a board. One of my favorite statements is that we have to walk the talk, so we're gonna be deliberate about not only getting the board to have a representative of that whole ecosystem of diverse profiles, but as well as trying to get and help clubs get involved with the diversity requirements of where our world is moving to. And I think that at the end of the day, we are going to make sure that from a strategic planning point of view, it will be a major focus of how we go about doing those things.
Yes, and I'd also say that even currently, we are actively involved in bringing primarily younger voices, which I think includes that level of greater diversity. We have a series of youth summits planned, both for this fall and into next spring. Our Next Gen is having their annual meeting a week from, well, this coming Friday. They'll be hiking into the Lenfoot Inn with, and then some board members and other people will be calling in for a weekend of planning for their next year of work. We're also integrating better Next Gen members into board committee members. ATC has hired some people that has come off Next Gen, and I believe we just brought a former Next Gen onto Stewardship Council for the upcoming term. So the work, particularly I want to call out to Julie Judkins on staff, has really led and built an incredible program around this, and I feel that we're definitely moving in the right direction.
This question is about advocacy. She says, I have seen more emails and Facebook posts asking people to contact the government about several issues. What is the role that you see ATC playing when it comes to advocacy and politics?
Well, I believe I'll take the second word first, politics. The Appalachian Trail, again, we'll continue on the unique theme. The Appalachian Trail is uniquely non-political. It is uniquely bipartisan. It goes through a multitude of states that have different parties leading those states, and we have always welcomed and celebrated that support. So I think from the politics side, that's not what the AT is about. That being said, I do think that advocacy is critically important because it's really, we need to ensure that we have the proper funding and that if laws and regulations are changing that negatively impact what we are purposefully entrusted to protect, we need to respond and react. And so I hope that if you're getting emails from us asking you to contact your congressman about certain issues, that you do so. That's certainly the first and foremost important way that you can help with advocacy. We do have a legislative director on staff who is actively working out of DC. I'm in fact scheduled at the end of this month. We have a strong AT caucus that was formed a couple years ago, and we're having a kickoff breakfast for the next session at the end of this month. So I'll be down in DC, I think on the 29th of October, to have breakfast with our caucus members and start mapping out how they can support the AT moving forward.
And, history has shown that grassroots efforts work. And as we said earlier, the volunteer community is the heart and soul of this group. So leveraging all of you out there to help in that initiative, in any initiative, to make sure the trail is maintained in the way we're looking towards broader landscape is very, very critical. So I think that we should get more effective at doing that. We'll get more pointed at it, and you should see more of that. And we encourage you and hope that you can respond and help us in that regard.
So in addition to advocacy and what ways can hikers get more directly involved in AT protection?
Leave no trace. First and foremost, be responsible, personally responsible as a hiker. Do what you can to protect the resource that you're using. I strongly, and I've always, my husband and I manage the Blackburn Trail Center, which is just 12 miles south on the AT from Harper's Ferry. And we've been doing that for years. And a lot of times, and in fact, we lived there 2 years as caretakers. And a lot of times, both as a volunteer and when I was living there, I'd cook dinners, put on spaghetti dinners for hikers coming through. But I always told them, well, no such thing as a free meal. So they had to listen to a little speech from me. And one of the things that I always encourage hikers to do is to join a local trail club. If you're not living in one of our trail states, if you're out in Ohio or California, trust me, there are trail organizations, there's volunteers going into parks wherever you live, and they're all desperately in need of help and support. So so there's two things. One is be personally responsible and take care of the resource. And two, volunteer where you can, when you can, to clubs and organizations that are out there doing more maintenance kind of work.
And I'll use in my answer the word that was in the question, be an advocate. Be an advocate with your neighbors, with your family, encourage them, educate them, encourage them to participate in the AT community. The more the more folks we can have engaged, the better off we are. So be an advocate.
Next question. This person asks, you talked a little bit about the priorities for ATC moving forward, but what are some of the biggest challenges for the AT and the ATC in future years?
I'll start.
Yeah.
So, obviously financial. So I request and ask for anybody to open up your wallets and do whatever you can. It doesn't matter what it is, it's helpful. So there's financial challenges. There is going to be environmental challenges, and that's going to put a lot of pressure on the trail clubs to keep things maintained. There's going to be political challenges where there are going to be folks who are driving different uses of that environment than what the hiker is going to want. So all those challenges are sitting in front of us, and we're going to need a collective body of people, again, who are advocating the mission and vision of the trail, in the trail community is that group. So that would be my start at it.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with all of that. I think internally, the organization, we need to become more efficient and more structured in the way that we approach things. I think that's going to require some cultural shifts with our staff. We continue to, right now we're recruiting for several positions, and so continue to be in need of skilled and dedicated employees, and I think that's a critical piece always moving forward. So I absolutely agree. I think there's lots of different things that's going to be, but I also am pretty confident, and I think that a lot of what we are at least initially talking about with our current strategic planning is building these things into that as we look to what we want to do, so that we're positioned to be active, not reactive, as these things are coming down the pike.
In that vein, I would say the board is going to share those responsibilities. The board has talked quite a bit about being equally responsible and equally accountable, driving board behaviors of oversight, strategy, and policy, and we're going to be very deliberate with staff on drawing those lines so that we know what our roles are, we're playing in our own sandbox, and we're supporting each other.
This question is specifically for Sandy. Based on the recent transition in leadership, does ATC have plans to increase communications internally and externally so the organization's decision-making process is transparent?
So, okay, can you say that again? Because that was a long question.
Sure, yep. So the root of the question is, does ATC have plans to increase communications internally and externally so the organization's decision-making process is transparent?
I want to think about that for a minute. I think a couple things. Let me start with this. I do feel that we need to better marry our communication with a lot of our outreach functions. To that extent, one of the things that I am doing in the next couple weeks is a reorganization structurally where I'm creating a Vice President of Advancement position. And under that is going to reside advocacy, education and outreach, development, and communications. Because I feel that all those things collectively are what are forward and public faces to the outside world. I think that there are going to be times where decisions get made because they need to be made for what's best in the organization, and we will always communicate the decisions. As for transparency during the process, I think that there's times when that can certainly be the case, and then there's going to be times where, as with any business, decisions will be made, but I do promise that communication to those decisions will be quick and transparent. One of the things that I recognized when I took this role on just 6 weeks ago was that there had been a drop-off, particularly internally, as to transparency and communication. And I've worked very hard. I have a bi-weekly note from Sandy that's going out to the staff. In the brief 6 weeks that we've had this transition, I've held 2 all-hands meetings with staff. We had a stakeholder partner phone call, Zoom call that I think had about 70 participants, subsequent for a different subject, but also just serendipitously brought together Mid-Atlantic clubs and volunteers. So I was on that call. I've worked very hard in communicating with both the board of directors and the President's Leadership Council. You'll be finding my first column coming out in AT Journeys. So I absolutely believe in communication, but I also will be honest, because that's all I know how to do, is there's going to be times where we make decisions and we'll be communicating the decision, but I will not be opening up the gates to, have you sit in on my meetings with them as we were coming to those decisions. So I'm not sure about that part about the process, but definitely always communicating the decision.
And I know this was a Sandy question, but I can't help myself.
Thanks. You did move really far back, though,
I did.
initially.
I gotta be careful about exactly what the question was, so. Listen, I think that whole transparency issue is a board issue as well. I mean, and so what we're doing as a board is we're gonna have conversations at every board meeting about what's going on, talk to each other about how we're doing, how we're feeling. I think it's important. I have conversations with Sandy every week, sometimes more than once a week. We don't always agree, and that's okay. But more often than not, we are in agreement. It takes us time to work through it, but we are committed to be an open and transparent organization. So that's our commitment.
Great, thank you. The tragic murder of a hiker on the Appalachian Trail earlier this year left the AT hiking community in shock. What is the ATC's role in helping keep AT visitors safe?
Why don't you go first?
Okay.
Yeah.
So, under the agreement that we have with the National Park Service, that is what makes the Conservancy responsible for what we're responsible for. We are actually not responsible for law enforcement. So I want to be really clear. The ultimate responsibility for law enforcement resides with the National Park Service, and then they coordinate with local police and rescue and within the jurisdictions. ATC, I believe, has always been good at providing information and accurate information to hikers. We recently upgraded the way that hikers can submit incidents through our reporting system. We also, though, in streamlining that process and seeing an uptick in reports, it's driven home to us that we need to continue to work to better define what, in fact, is our role and responsibility versus what the National Park Service is. I will say recently, which has also been a really tremendous help, is that through Karen Farley, who was our acting ranger up to a few months ago, she, for the first time, connected the Appalachian Trail to the appropriate National Park Service dispatch system, which all other national parks already was connected to for reporting critical incidents. And that information on how to reach that dispatch is available through our website, and anyone calling into our Visitor and Information Center can also find out that information. I believe we also sent out a series of posters that got posted up and down the trail with that dispatch number. So that's been a huge help as well. Also, just this fall, we've hired an intern that has experience through the military with incident management, and we are going to take advantage of his expertise and time with us to start to, one, analyze what kinds of incidents are coming through ATC's reporting system, kind of put them in different buckets, and start a more structured conversation with Wendy Jansen, who is the superintendent of the Appalachian Trail Park, as to better define our roles moving forward as it relates to incident reporting.
And I would say, so you can see why we love Sandy, it's in her DNA. It's not just the ATC's responsibility, it's all of our responsibility. So I would ask the hiker community and those who are out there doing volunteering to be as responsible in safety as we are trying to adhere to everyone to, and create the incident reporting structure. But the whole area of safety, it's like leave no trace. It's all of our responsibility for safety. So, you know, they say, see something, say something. And as sad as it may be that the trail might bring in some of the societal things that we are trying to walk away from, as the pressures of incidences causes us, we do need to be attentive when we're out there, and we need to make sure that we're taking the appropriate time to report something that we see.
Thank you for that. This is a question from Smile and Don. Had to call out his trail name. I like that. He asks, what are the plans for Over Mountain Shelter after it was closed by the U.S. Forest Service due to safety concerns? Does the ATC know about any future plans for
Well,
that?
we're really up into current events, aren't we? So that was I just saw that come through my inbox, I think 2 days ago. I don't know is going to be my answer as to what the long-term solution is going to be for that. That is going to be up to the U.S. Forest Service. I do know that the reason for the closure is absolutely surrounded by, based on safety. It's a beautiful shelter. It's my husband. I mean, he was very sad to hear that it was closing, if even maybe temporarily or permanently, because it's one of his favorite shelters. But, you know, with that second story, the possibility of collapse due to rot and just the need for some significant rehab, the Forest Service didn't have a choice. So I know it's closing. I'm not sure that any of our staff even knows more than that at this point, but we'll keep you posted, absolutely, because I think we've already put out notification that it's happening.
Thank you. Colin, did you have anything to add? No.
No.
Just wanted to make sure I didn't cut you off. Smile and Don also asked this. He wants to know ways that members who reside in distant states can be involved in volunteer projects on the AT, and he has a suggestion. For example, more projects could be planned to coincide with trail days or the Alda gathering.
Well, I believe that Hardcore is still running out of trail days. So we do have a long-standing crew that, and if you have an opportunity to come to trail days, I think you need to maybe sign up early. It does fill up pretty quickly. But if you kind of shoot off a separate email to us, if you don't have the contact information, I think we could figure out how to get you in touch with who's running that crew now. I think that definitely keep a look. We actually are just also in the process of evaluating where we are with all of our crew programs. The senior conservation staff just held a retreat up at Bears Den here outside of Harper's Ferry. To talk about that, I have the preliminary report from Andrew in my box as to some of the things that they'd like to see moving forward. We definitely see an uptick in our developing the crew program. We see a lot of need for those kinds of more skilled tactical approaches. So I think the trail crews are going to be a great opportunity for people from all over the world to come in and participate with us on trail work.
And we're building a process with systems that will inform you, allow you to get in there, take a look at what kind of volunteering opportunities might exist. So as that gets more and more rolled out, you'll have an opportunity to go online, see what's available, and look to sign up for that, so.
What role do AT communities have in protecting the Appalachian Trail and furthering the mission of the ATC?
So I think the AT communities have the opportunity to have a huge role on a number of things. Central, focal area for advocacy. They have the opportunity to serve as a great source of volunteering. They have an opportunity to leverage the trail community for their economic systems and their tourism, if you will. And we have started, well, it's probably 2 or 3 years ago, we've been engaging the communities, we're including them on our regional planning committees, and there is work to be done, but I think the opportunity there is all upside, and it's a matter of just getting ourselves focused on what to attack first.
And we've built out quite a bit now, some key AT community pages on our website. And I really encourage, if there's other communities out there that haven't yet gotten us information, it talks about specifics, kind of the special beauty and important sites that are specific to your community. And then we also list local AT businesses, AT supporting businesses, so that we drive the traffic when they come into that community, that those are the first businesses that they frequent when they're visiting. So, we continue. I think we're just bringing online Round Hill, Virginia is the next community that just came on, and I think we're in the process of building up their page now on the website.
All right, this question is related to Wild East. Can you expand on what you believe the Wild East Communications Campaign means to the ATC's mission?
Okay, I'll give it a shot. We had a very, very long conversation yesterday as a board about Wild East. And I would say to you that it's a great communication tool to understand how our next layer of advocacy needs to be, which is the broader landscape. We have evolved from a footpath, which, by the way, wasn't necessarily a dedicated footpath. It went through streets and all that sort of thing. We moved that to have a perimeter around that footpath. We know that even if you go back to the original paper back in 1921 from Benton Mackay, he laid out the broader landscape as really the goal of this initiative. So it's sort of our evolution path to move towards a focus to that broader landscape, and we are committed to driving a whole program around that activity and to really fulfill that 100-year vision. And the strategy work is underway. We spent hours talking about this yesterday, and we'll spend more hours on it, but it really is a very, very important next step to where we're going.
I think that's good.
Okay, this question came in. This particular woman lives in Northern Virginia. She says she spends a lot of time on the trail and plans to through hike next year. This year in particular, she's noticed an uptick in the number of homeless people using the shelters. She says that some other people she's come in contact with have had similar experiences. Are there any plans to deal with this? And she just reiterates, as a woman who often hikes solo, this is concerning to her.
So, I can relate. I'm a woman who often hikes solo as well. So, I certainly understand that. I still say that, and even now, I still feel safer on the trail than, when I go to a city. As far as just recognizing once I'm backcountry, in general, I think the trail remains one of the safest places that we can go to versus, say, a bike trail cutting through town. That being said, everyone has to be vigilant. As far as homeless in the shelters, we do have a pretty robust trail runner program through, not Trail Runner, Ridge Runner program, thank you, especially through Northern Virginia. And so I think that it's important, if you're not seeing one of the Ridge Runners out there, you could call either the local club in purpose of Northern Virginia, that's the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club, or you could just reach out, dial 911 to the local fire station. If you're in Loudoun County, call the Loudoun County Police Department. Any of those calls will trigger a response from local law enforcement. And I think there's a few things. I think that this idea, like even Ridge Runners though, are not invested with the authority to run a person off. So I want to be really clear about that. The Ridge Runners are paid staff. They either work for the local trail club, for the jurisdiction, or for ATC, but they are not vested with law enforcement authority. So even the response that they would do with that information is to, in fact, call local law enforcement. I definitely think if they're in an AT shelter, that also qualifies as a call to the National Park Service dispatch system, which would send it to our current ranger, who also would either then personally go up there and, in fact, evict or get local law enforcement to do so. But it is a process. So I want to be really clear. ATC is not vested with authority to do anything about that. What we can do is be a conduit to reporting, but think about this too. If you have the opportunity to make a single call, you could call it to our system, in which case we then will have a further delay to then get that out to the right people, or you call the dispatch number directly, or you call the local sheriff's department directly with that information. And it's kind of cuts out that middle man of passing the information on.
I mean, it's a perfect example of, we're all responsible for the safety and security of the trail. And so if you see something, say something. It's not maybe the best answer that you can get, but if you don't feel comfortable, if you don't feel secure, make the call. And we actually had a conversation this morning about how we can simplify the website so that you have access to those numbers and those links, and we'll look at that, so that will make it a little more easier. But it's 2,200 miles long, and it's not going to be paroled. I mean, that's the value of the trail, right? So I agree, it's much more safer there than in the streets, but it's very, very important that if you see something, say something.
Thank you. All right, switching gears, the 31 trail clubs do great work in managing and maintaining the AT, but there are areas of the trail where more volunteer capacity is needed. Does the ATC have any new approaches in mind to fill these gaps in volunteerism and attract more young people?
So part of the strategy planning that we're doing is right on the volunteer world, and we're looking at all of that. I know that we talk about this at the RPC meetings as well, about how we can make sure that the trail clubs, whom we depend on in a great amount of most of the trail, to do that work. So we are partnering with them. We are looking at what the alternatives are. Part of that could be the youth initiatives that we have, trying to bring in some younger folks who can augment what is otherwise some aging folks, or folks who are no longer able to do the maintenance. So it is an initiative that we're looking at, we're serious about it, and it is something we have to figure out. Anything to add?
No, I mean, I think we've been making an investment in a database system, and we're still in progress in that development, but the ultimate goal there is to create a way to better capture, say, the earlier person that lives outside that wants to volunteer, capturing that information and being able to get that on to groups that need volunteers. And then, as I said, we're looking to further build out our trail crews, so looking for ways to feed people into those as well to help support the work that the clubs are doing.
And we have exhausted all the questions. Thanks, Sandy, Colin, and everyone.
And you've
who's
not
listened.
exhausted us, though.
Well, thank you everyone for taking the time to ask those questions. So let me go through the board election results. As you know, Beth Critton, Ruben Rosales, Greg Winchester, and Norm Finley were up for re-election. And the slate was voted on favorably by 93.6% of the voters. So, welcome aboard again, guys, women, thank you very much for your service. So that concludes the meeting. I again want to say thank you to all of you for taking time in your busy schedule. It's important that we hear from you, so thank you for your questions. Your support is important to us, whether it's financial or volunteering or both. We appreciate all of that, so thank you again for that. And on a personal note, I would encourage us to take some time, go out on the trail, take a walk, disconnect, and just listen to Mother Nature. So that's it. Thank you very much for everything. Take care.